This is the most important page at this stage of the course. Nonprofit rules, advocacy versus lobbying. The first thing worth mentioning is that, contrary to popular belief, C3s, which is what High Sky Society is, are allowed to lobby. Per the by the These C3s and C4s and all of these weird numbers and letters are defined by the IRS. And a C3 is important because you're tax exempt. So, per the Internal Revenue Service, the amount of lobbying activities are done by a 501c3 must not be substantial. And then there's a link you can click and read that directly on the IRS website. Though the IRS does not specifically define what substantial means, general practice is not to exceed 15% of activities. So High Sky could lobby 15% or less of our total activities. The second thing that needs to be understood is the difference between lobbying and advocating, which I've already said and we're going to repeat over and over and over in this course. The following definitions are from the American Heritage Dictionary of the English language. Lobbying is to try to influence the thinking of legislators or public officials for or against a specific cause or piece of legislation, legislation really being the key word there. Advocacy is the act of supporting or arguing in favor of a cause, idea, or policy. So yes, there is overlap. Many organizations avoid advocacy because they confuse it with lobbying. Even though most advocacy work does not meet the IRS definition of lobbying, lobbying generally means expressing view on a specific legislation, while activities such as educating policymakers, discussing public issues, or providing nonpartisan analysis are typically considered advocacy. Overall, there are three key aspects to remember. Advocacy is organized action in support of an idea or cause. Advocacy includes educating elected officials on important issues. Advocacy involves building ongoing and trusted relationships with policymakers. So, what we're doing in this course is advocacy and organized action, okay? Because we're not just going to talk about this, we're going to actually do it as part of the capstone project. And even though advocacy is really kind of focused on like nonpartisan, I want to say that, just to go back to the previous page, I'm giving 3 bullets to sort of cover the spectrum of where people fall on their left or right, I guess, side of the aisle. That doesn't mean hydrogen aviation is a political thing, but it just, it gives you sort of an opening of where to talk to them. And we'll come back to that some more as well. Before I move on, I would love to use this opportunity for Mike. If you want to share, because I think this is where a lot of people get stuck, and I haven't been able to see all of the results, but I think a lot of people do have sort of a negative idea around lobbying and think that we're not really supposed to. So, Mike, if you want to share some of your experience, I think this would be a great time before we get into the weeds on the next part. I do think it would be valuable if you shared the email that you sent to me earlier. I know it's not a chart, but it was still
Yeah,
very valuable.
yeah.
Yeah, my
Um,
screen share.
Thanks. So just a few words. Just about all of you know my background, but I'm an aerospace engineer, been in the aerospace industry 35 years, and between 2011 and 2023, I was the director of a nonprofit, originally the American Helicopter Society, but then we renamed to the Vertical Flight Society, even though we were interested in stuff that wasn't pure vertical. So advanced air mobility, electric VTOL, hydrogen aviation, those were all adjacent areas that we were very interested in. And it was a 501c3. And before I started in the 2000s, it had been very successful in getting Congress to put in language that directed the Department of Defense to start the Future Vertical Lift Program, which is now being developed, 20 years later, as the Bell MV-75 Valor tiltrotor, the future long-range assault aircraft. There is, billions of dollars spent in competition and stuff like that. But we were the little pebble that started this, and we kept adding more pebbles until it became an avalanche and resulted in one of the biggest defense programs ever. Similarly, over the years, and we worked with a group, ACG Consulting, Mike Barbera, in the early 2000s. When I started in 2011, I guess within a year or so, he came and talked to me about some of the things, and We explained to Congress, we went to members of Congress and said, hey, there's this future vertical lift thing, and we want to have a lot of competition. We want to have funding going to not just, the major primes, but to other people who could really change things, really be disruptive. And so, we made a convincing argument, and Congress added funds several years in a row and really supported the program when it came up. So it was a lot of education, so that when the program got to be, from a few $1 million to hundreds of millions of dollars and eventually billions of dollars, then uh, there was a huge number of the right people in Congress who knew about the program and could support it. So there are a number of other cases like that that we did, and I'll be giving some case studies a little bit later in the course. But I want to so Daniel asks how many people were in that initial group of advocacy. Well, it was mainly me. We had the lobbyist Mike Barbera, and we would go in to see representatives. Also, people like John Piasecki, the CEO of Piasecki Aircraft, was a key guy, and a couple others. But it was very small. But I got like the CEOs of the 5 big helicopter companies to sign out a letter to the Secretary of Defense. I mean, we did a lot of really important stuff. But again, it was like pebbles, right? But Congress put in this saying, Army, DoD, you should do this program, and eventually it happened. I want to share. So I'm going to explain what I sent to Danielle in the email, and she's catching me a little bit off guard. I would like to talk about this more, and I'm glad I'll have a chance later on in the course. But I'm a member of several different societies, all of them 501c3s. I'm also a member of the Planetary Society, which is a 501c3. Again, a C3 is a charitable nonprofit. It could be a church, it could be a welfare organization. The ones I'm involved with are all technical societies or educational societies. And I was looking at Danielle shared some of the feedback she'd gotten of people who were telling her that she can't have this course. And I'm like, no, nonprofits, charitable nonprofits can do advocacy. And so I looked at the Planetary Society, and they led a major initiative last year that was Save NASA Science. It was wildly successful. They had, I think, 18 or 19 others, nonprofits that joined in with them, AAA, all kinds of other organizations, and they had several day of actions on Capitol Hill, and there's another one coming up next Monday, which I'm again joining. It's only $50 to join, and even though I'm not a space guy, I'm a science guy, and the Commerce, Justice, and Science committee in both the House and the Senate includes NASA funding, including aeronautics, NASA funding, National Science Foundation, NOAA. So I paid my $50 just because they did such a great job with their advocacy efforts. So I looked them up on Candid. This used to be called GuideStar, but it's a site that collects nonprofit tax returns and stuff like that. I'm going to paste in here just for your reference about the Planetary Society. This is their public, you can see their tax returns and stuff like that. I'm going to share my screen here because this is a couple years old.
And I just wanted to add in,
And you can tell me
for the
to talk less.
no, Mike, this is fantastic. And I think what you were talking about just now also led to you meeting Bill Nye the Science Guy, which is amazing. Yeah, but I just wanted to also let people know that and I didn't know any of this before launching High Sky either. I learned a lot from Mike. But to be a 501c3, all of your financials must be public. All the money moving in and out of your company is public, and you can go on GuideStar. It's more user friendly. Another one is Politico, I think it's called .org. But you'll find High Sky stuff. You'll see who our donors are, all of that. So you'll also see if they engage in advocacy. So this is a very credible source, and if you're ever curious about what a nonprofit is up to, you can just look them up on here. I look up AIAA, Vertical Flight Society. So that's how I know what I'm allowed and not allowed to do, is I just look at what others have been doing and how they classify it. So anyway, continue. I just wanted to share that little what
Yeah,
GuideStar was.
yeah. I pasted a link in there. Like I said, I think you have to create a free account to get into some more of these details. They have a tax return every year. So it's always a couple years behind. This is for their tax year that was 2023 to 2024. Okay, so it's it's a year or two old. But I was just kind of blown away a little bit here. They're 501(c)(3) mission, it's all caps, so you can't read it. But programs, what they actually do, right? They have 5 programs. This is a couple years ago. The number one, political advocacy for solar system exploration. I mean, this is their biggest program. This says the number of meetings with policymakers or candidates. Last year, I don't know, it was all of them, right? I mean, they met with everybody. So, this is how much work they did, like before NASA funding was cut off. The FY26 and now the 27 budget cuts it by like a third. So like, as the astronauts are going the farthest away from, the Earth ever in the history of the world, doing this incredible accomplishment, the budget comes out on April 3rd and slashes NASA's budget. And particularly in a lot of the unmanned, the satellites and probes and stuff like that. Just some of them are already in space, but it just turn out the lights on them. But anyway, so I'm digressing. Well, let me get a little bit faster here. So they don't call it lobbying; they call it advocacy. And here it is. You can see this is space policy is what they actually call it. $473,000, which is primarily one person's salary and other kinds of stuff like that. They also got some support from another nonprofit. I think what that grant is. So so this expense is here. So I did the math. I had to do the calculation, but the total revenue for that year was $2 million, of which they spent almost $500,000. So it's 9% of their revenue on advocacy. I'm sure they've done a lot more. I've spent a lot more money on advocacy, but as long as it's less than 15%, it's all clear. So anyway, a little bit of a diatribe there, but just I get incensed when Danielle shared some of the feedback. You can't do this. You're gonna have to set up a separate or advocacy lobbying group. It is, and let me just switch over to this. I'm gonna go ahead and share something else now since I find my ribbon. I was kind of joking with Danielle. Sorry.
Hi, George. I'm so sorry I did not see you in the waiting room. What we're discussing right now is actual examples of 501(c)(3s lobbying and advocating, and Mike's giving some great examples. But you haven't missed much.
Oh, don't say that. So,
No, I don't. I'm sorry. I meant me. No, because you that sounded so bad. I'm so sorry, Mike. I was
I'm
talking
joking.
about me. Mike just started.
So anyway, we live in a representative democracy. We elect people who vote on legislation and policies to represent their constituencies and the future of the nation. Abraham Lincoln said, it's a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. So it is I was joking before, your God-given right, but it's your duty as an American citizen, if you're an American citizen, to tell your representatives what you want out of life. What you want them to do. You're supposed to talk to your representatives. Your representatives supposed to listen. That is how our democracy works. I also just wanted to show this is again a little bit off topic here, but just a little bit here on the process, the appropriations process, and I apologize that this is out of order, but this is specifically the Planetary Society. Again, you should join the planetary.org. But this shows the kind of the general, and this was from a webinar they did on Sunday night. The different agencies come up with their budget. That's then iterated with the office of the president and comes up with both a top line. Okay, NASA, instead of $23 billion, you're only going to get $17 billion this year, and has all the programs that NASA is supposed to work on. Okay. And so that's iterated between the NASA administrator and the office of the president. And then that's published. The White House, April 3rd, published all the budget requests. They called it the skinny budget because it didn't have all the levels of detail. But had like 3 orders of levels of detail. Then that's transmitted to Congress. This is debated both by the House of Representatives and in the Senate. The first from the subcommittee, and in this case, it's the Commerce, Justice, and Science subcommittee, and then that's the subcommittee of the, I believe, is the Appropriations Committee. And then once that's approved, whatever that's approved, then that goes to the whole House to be voted on. The Senate does the same thing, and then they get together in a conference committee, and then once they agree on that, then it's separately passed by the House and the Senate, and then that goes to the president for his or her signature. And it's supposed to be done by September 30th, which is the end of the fiscal year. And then um, which actually been happening the last, several years, is Congress and the Senate, maybe they vote, but they never get together in a conference. So it's just a whole bunch of continuing resolutions for month after month. And then they do something called an omnibus, which is we'll just pass everything all together. So just a little bit of, high level introduction to what you'll see over the next several weeks is there's the process, the appropriations process, how it's supposed to happen, and then there's what the actual reality that we're dealing with. And with the current administration, they're doing stuff differently. That's why they were elected. Majority of Americans wanted that. Or majority of voters, asked for that. So it's not what it used to be, and then we have to work around the current process and talk to our representatives about what we want them, how we want them to represent us in Congress.
Thanks, Mike. That was perfect. And I think I'll share my screen again. I'm going to go a little bit out of
Wait,
order on.
can I
Yes,
jump in? Just
of course.
not that I wasn't listening to Mike, but while I was listening to Mike, I put a bunch of stuff as he was talking about it in the chat, so you can see the current NASA budget, proposed budget slides from the White House, and there's a schedule for House appropriations discussions, markups, which begin this week as well. And then going back to the earlier point, Danielle, there's a page from the Council of Nonprofits on nonprofit advocacy and lobbying. And then there's the second link, which goes directly to an IRS letter that specifically says 501c3s are welcome to expend a certain amount of their resources on lobbying.
Yeah. So Danielle, maybe I should go on your website or on your LinkedIn post about this. And again, for C3s, even though this allows you to do lobbying, we really do advocacy. You're not saying, it's education and advocating for policy. Sorry, Todd.
And I would add to that, what we're doing here today, we're not lobbying anybody, right? We're
We're not
training
even
people.
talking to
We're training
legis.
people to lobby for themselves, right? Any
Yes,
member
exactly.
of High Sky is allowed to engage in lobbying for their business. It's a First Amendment right, and it goes back to the Magna Carta. I mean, it's just, what's the point of having a representative government if we can't appeal to it? And so Danielle, training people to advocate for themselves or even lobby on behalf of positions that make a difference to their companies is entirely a legitimate activity. In fact, it's a perfect activity for an organization like High Sky.
No. And just another, you mentioned your companies, but even like if it's not your company, if you're an individual or whatever that you just think is important. I mean, I was part of the Virginia delegate this October for their second day of the Planetary Society's second day of action. There was people from government employees that were impacted. There were, I was there as a consultant. There was somebody who was managed a grocery store in Virginia, and he felt NASA was important. And there's, his viewpoint doesn't count any more or less than mine. Every citizen has the constitutional right and duty to inform their elected officials to represent them. That's what a representative democracy is.
Thanks so much. Yeah, it was quite surprising some of the pushback that we received during this course. But like I said, when I was making this document, I learned this from other C3s. In fact, I borrowed heavily from the Society of Women Engineers advocacy guidebook that they have. So I skipped a couple pages. We'll go back to them. So far, me a year ago, if I would have heard everything that was just said, it would have still been foggy. And when I'm looking at this thing that Todd just showed, I would think, okay, I'll just have to wait and see what gets announced when this is all said and done. I don't fit into any of this. I would have said that a year ago. But today, we are going to learn that we do fit into that and how we fit into that. And so I'll just read through this, and this is reiterating what Mike showed in his process slide with NASA and Congress. So, the background of the annual federal budget process. So, the federal budget process begins when OMB, which is the Office of Management and Budget, I think. Yeah, I should. Shame on me for not spelling that out right there. I know better than that. Guides agencies like NASA and FAA in preparing budget requests. Before I even move on to the next sentence, I want you to really concretely in your mind, and I liked Mike's slide better because he actually had pictures, but I want you to get in your mind the difference between an agency and Congress. So an agency is NASA. Congress is obviously the House and the Senate. So think of those separately in your mind because that's going to be important throughout this course. So OMB guides agencies like NASA and FAA in preparing budget requests. The president's budget is sent to Congress in February, and Congress then decides funding through the appropriations process, where most advocacy occurs. So advocacy is noted below with a star. So where you see a star is where you can get involved. Now, mind you, mine is on how it's supposed to work, and Mike's had another slide of how it really works. But in a utopia, this is how it would work. But either way, you still will get involved where there's a star. So I'm going to start in this area. So as you see, it's a loop, right? So you kind of get in where you fit in. But I'm going to start with here because it's April. So, but I guess I'll start here. So the end of the year last year, President signs appropriation bills, new fiscal year begins. So the 2026, I shouldn't say 20, the current fiscal year began October 1st of last year. We're here, and OMB provides guidance to federal agencies. So OMB would be providing guidance to NASA, FAA, right? Agencies begin preparing budget proposals. So NASA, FAA would be preparing budget proposals. And this is time to educate federal agencies. Okay. And so this is where we would go to NASA and FAA and say some things that I'm going to show you in a minute and what that looks like from an organized advocacy lens. Then in September, the agencies submit budget proposals to OMB. October through January, OMB reviews agency budget proposals, revised proposals based on feedback, and then OMB compiles the president's budget. And then in February, president submits to the president's budget. President submits the president's budget to Congress. And then February through April, House Budget Committee reviews requests, Senate reviews requests. We'll look at this again later. Congress passes a budget resolution. And this is key things. Now, this is where we would want to educate Congress. If you notice, we're also in this time frame. So we can right now be educating agencies and Congress, which we are going to do during this cohort. Then May through September, these months may vary a little, but May through September, the House and the Senate, they have their appropriation subcommittees and hold hearings. Subcommittees mark up and draft appropriations bills, and they submit written testimony, and they submit written testimony to Congress and recommend X amount of funding. I need to reiterate that what we educate, I wish it would let me highlight this, but it won't. What we advocate to federal agencies right now will be, ideally, if we're organized and structured and we do it correctly, will be included in their budgets that they submit. Okay. And what we educate Congress on is going to be familiar. So when Congress sees something coming from NASA that they recognize, they will recognize it because we've educated NASA and we've educated Congress. So it's not the first time either group is seeing it. And so I have a star here, even though this isn't really our advocacy per se, this is seeing our advocacy come to life because we advocated the agencies. So we were able to get into the agency's budget and we educated Congress. And so Congress voted, yes, okay, I like that. So we'll see it kind of come to life here. I think maybe and sorry for this, let me actually just pull up the Google Doc of this. Maybe I can zoom in a more user-friendly way because I'm not liking how that's showing up. I think where some of the misconception comes in on this chart is, that didn't do you any favors, did it? Is that I am not suggesting here that we're advocating to give High Sky money. or to give eternium money. What we are advocating is, well, let's just pull that up actually. Let's pull up what that looks like. Now's as good as a time as any. So here is a draft letter to NASA. In the comments, tell me, is this draft letter, and I'll give you a second to read it, is this educating, what part of the process is this? Out of the, let me give you a link to this letter so you can look at it better. I'll stick the link in the chat. And by the way, we are going to submit these letters as well as part of this group. So now you see why I said it was a big deal. And then let me pull up the chart for you. I think it maybe was actually better when I did the PDF. So what part of this flow is the letter to NASA? And if you're not sure, then please let me know, because that's the only way. I've spent a lot of time digesting this material. And so I have no idea if it's obvious or not. So I need feedback. If it's not clear, then we need to dig into it deeper. So I have crickets. Bianca, I'm going to use you as my guinea pig. I know that Mike and Todd probably know the answer. And if they don't, then we're really screwed. No, I'm teasing. But I'll give you a clue. We fit into the stars, right? And I kind of told you that this isn't really our advocacy. This is us seeing the fruits of our labor. So you have two choices that have a star.
One moment. I'm digesting the information.
Yeah, no worries. And see, this is why probably in person is better, because some of you are probably multitasking and I'd be like, hey, you need to pay attention. This is important. I get it. I would be doing it too. But I want you all to get your money's worth out of this course. So, David, I'm going to call on you. Can you be my guinea pig?
What's up?
So, my question is, are you following and have you opened the letter to NASA? Okay. Okay, great. So I asked a kind of a tough pop quiz question. So assume that we got, I don't know, 30 companies to sign the letter to NASA. I'll say we have Zero Avia, Joby Aviation, Eternium Aerospace, High Sky. I don't know that High Sky would sign it, but just say we have 30 companies that sign this letter to NASA. And here's the letter. Really, you just need to kind of look at these paragraphs and you can open it. My question is, what part of this cycle is this letter a part of? Like once we submit the letter to NASA, you have two choices. They have a star. So are we educating federal agencies or are we educating Congress?
I think we're educating the agency.
Exactly. So this is the educating the agencies. Thank you for being my guinea pig. For this cohort to be effective, this is very important. So, as I had mentioned a year ago, if I would have seen this document that Todd so kindly put together, I would have thought this has nothing to do with me and I would just have to wait and see what happens. What I now understand is I can influence this and so can you. And the first step is educating the agencies. And so we have a letter to educate NASA here, and we're going to sign this. And we have 50 plus ideally, but it'll probably be more like 30. So, and we'll be sending this letter out and getting folks to sign it. So thank you for your answer. So again, I'm going to reiterate, I say here, advocacy is noted with a star. Technically, there's a star here, but this is really where we see the fruits of our labor. So this is more, I should probably not have a star here, but I wanted it highlighted. And I guess that was the only way I saw to do it. But there are two things that we're going to be doing: educating agencies and educating Congress. Okay, so that letter is one example of educating an agency. We also have a letter to the FAA, but I'm going to save that one for later because you get the idea with how we would educate NASA. Any questions or comments so far? So now I'm going to sort of pivot. So we covered how we would educate an agency. That was just one example. We would do more of that, obviously. Now we're going to talk about how to contact legislators. I'll skip through some of the local and state stuff. We'll briefly cover it, but we're more going to be focused on federal. So now this would be important in the educating Congress portion. So in the U.S., federal, state, and local governments all pass laws that affect industry, infrastructure, and communities. We all know that. And we know that at the federal and state, we have two chambers, a Senate, upper level, and a House or Assembly, lower level. New laws begin when a legislator sponsors a bill, meaning they formally introduce an idea. That used to be an extremely foreign concept to me. Like, what does it mean to have a sponsor? The bill must pass both chambers and before being sent to the president or governor, which was interesting, Mike, that term that you used. I hadn't heard that before. It started with an O. What could you put that word in the chat? It's really like an O or a U. It was at the end of like on the right side of your slide on the how policy really happens or how the appropriations process. So I'll skip the local part. And so advocates often start by asking the officials who represent them to consider sponsoring or supporting legislation. The United States has two chambers, the House and the Senate. So this is important to know. How do you find them, right? Most of us know some of ours, but I mean, I didn't even know that these websites were available like this, where you can just look up who you need to talk to. So I encourage you to definitely look at those. And then I'm going to skip. Well, no, we definitely need to do state. So state to find your governor. Most of us, again, know who our governor is, but in Texas, I can go Texas. Obviously, it's Greg Abbott. And then your state legislators. So if you want to look up their websites as well. So it's just kind of cool. You can find everybody that you would want to or need to talk to. We're going to skip local for now, but that is important, but we'll skip that for now. This is a different version of what Mike showed earlier. So how does a bill become law in Congress? Legislation, there are two paths, right? Legislation is introduced in the House. The bill is assigned an H number and referred to a committee or subcommittee. Subcommittees or committees hold public hearings, commission studies, and make changes to the bill. Reported by the committee, rules committee determines limits on debate and amendments, and then the bill is debated and voted on. If it passes, it is sent to the other chamber. So if it comes from the House, then it's sent to the Senate. And then I'm not going to read this whole thing, but the only difference is it's on this side, it's given an S number, and then it's passed over to the House. And then it's sent to the White House for signature or veto. And I think Mike is driving in the car right now, but I do want that word because it sounds like there's something actually happening right in here, and I didn't catch that word.
Danielle, it's omnibus, the
Thank
omnibus
you.
bill, which is
Thank
it's a
you.
comprehensive, it covers everything, right? That's a
Okay.
continuation resolution stuff.
Okay. So is that like when maybe both of these, the Senate and the House, both have things that need to be voted on, and maybe they don't have time to go back and forth, so they just put both sides into one, and then it's called an omnibus, and it's sent. Is that
Yeah.
sort of what that? Okay.
Well, they're supposed to vote on 12 separate funding bills, and
Hmm.
when they start putting them together to make life easier, to get deal making done, then you start to grow toward an omnibus.
Yeah. So
Okay.
as Todd says, there's 12 different ones. There's defense. There's 12 different ones. NASA has it's the actual bill, right? CJS, Commerce, Justice, and Science bill, which funds those different agencies. But sometimes they combine a bunch of them.
Hmm.
They've had a couple. They'll call it a mini bus. I guess omni means everything. I think
See.
it's, I don't know, buses bill or something, but it's combining all the budgets together. And in this, my recollection was in January they passed all the rest of they passed an omnibus with many different agencies, including NASA, but the one they kept out was the Homeland Security, which is still
Mm.
not passed
Mm.
because of
Interesting.
the controversy over that. So that's a case where one of the 12 budget bills was never passed.
I see. Is that have to do with like AI and surveillance, or is it?
This is a
Mm.
congressional, or the
Okay. Yeah.
Democrats don't like ICE, how things are being handled.
Okay. Gotcha. Thank you.
So that part of the federal government is still officially shut down. Those people are still
Hmm.
on furlough or
Hmm.
not working or not getting paid, whatever.
And those people in the government are they are they specific? Could you give me an example of who's furloughed right now? Is it
Yeah.
the
So
people in Congress that are on that committee for Homeland Security, or what?
the United States has three branches of government, three co-equal branches of government, right? So there's the judicial, legislative, which is so judicial is the courts, legislative, which is
Mhm.
Congress, and then executive, which is all the agencies. And there's they do the checks and balances. So Congress funds the executive branch to actually execute things. So under the and it's way outside my domain of knowledge, but underneath the Homeland Security is um, it's ICE, it's TSA. So there's a lot of all the flight scheduling got messed up, but the president's moved some money around to be able to pay TSA agents so that people can still make their flights and things like that. But I don't
Mhm.
know. Call a friend, Todd. Other things. It's DHS, right? So it's got Coast Guard and all kinds of stuff in there.
Also got FEMA as well.
Yeah, all
Mhm.
those kinds of agencies, the Homeland Support, Homeland Security types of agencies. They're all still
Wow.
officially shut down on furlough, not
Mhm.
getting paid.
Okay, thank you. That helps. So here's just a quick summary: OMB, federal agencies, President, Congress, and appropriations. High level summary. OMB guidance is primarily internal to the executive branch and difficult for outside organizations to influence directly. Instead, advocacy efforts typically focus on educating federal agencies and members of Congress about emerging technologies and industry priorities during the appropriations process. Just a summary of what we covered, and I'm going to skip that part for now. We might come back to that later, but I want to cover this. So, where hydrogen aviation is at right now. I started, there are things I could have went back earlier in time, but I started with the FAA Reauthorization Act of 2024. And this is where Congress directed the FAA and DOE to create a national hydrogen aviation strategy within 1 year in consultation with NASA and other agencies. And then December 2024, the FAA publishes the hydrogen fueled aircraft safety and certification roadmap. And in this roadmap, FAA identifies problems to solve as certification gaps, hydrogen storage safety, fueling infrastructure, operational procedure, and regulatory framework. December 2024, the FAA establishes HAWG, the Hydrogen Aviation Working Group, to recommend how hydrogen aircraft can be safely certified and operated. And we're going to talk, there's a huge caveat here. We're going to talk about that, but I want to go back really quick so that we understand that the Hydrogen Aviation Working Group was a product of the Hydrogen Fueled Aircraft Safety and Certification Roadmap. And the roadmap from the FAA was a product of the FAA Reauthorization Act. So just kind of give you an idea of how like advocacy in before this happened led to these things. In a perfect world, this hydrogen aviation working group is off to the races. We'll talk about why it isn't and in a minute and our letter to the FAA. But for now, just pretend that it's off to the races. And then NASA, also that came out of that NASA Reauthorization Act of 2026 authorizes NASA to conduct hydrogen aviation research subject to congressional appropriations. And so, next up, we are here congressional appropriations needed for hydrogen aviation programs. So, advocate for federal funding to accelerate hydrogen aviation research, certification, and demonstration in the FY27 budget. And we're going to come back to the Hydrogen Aviation Working Group in a minute. I'll quickly go over this because this is pretty obvious, I think, to everybody here. But actually, I'm going to skip around. I'm going to skip around. So we talked about educating agencies, right? Writing the letter to NASA. I haven't showed you the letter to the FAA yet, but that would be another example of advocating or educating agencies, which falls into that, April star, not the Congress. Well, let me just go back up there, like I said, we really fall into these two stars: time to educate agencies and time to educate Congress. And if you notice, this says like April through June, and this says February through April. So we're in April, we can be doing both. And you can do any of these anytime, but just if you want to be strategic, you would do them in these. So we talked about educating the agencies, which would be industry. High Sky will gather a bunch of signatures for this letter to NASA, and then we'll submit it. And we have a letter for the FAA as well. We're also going to be requesting people's feedback on it, if it should be, adjusted or whatever. The letters, I'm going to refer to those as the letters going forward. The letters are our education to agency. And our education to Congress, that is going to be done in something that we're calling a fly-in or a virtual fly-in. So I'm going to skip to that section right now and just briefly cover that. So a fly-in is like an industry field trip. Hi, Philip. Welcome. Good to see you. I don't know if he made a joint and then jumped off. I saw him in here for a second. It doesn't. Okay, he is here. So a fly-in is and it is an advocacy day. And I, as an aerospace engineer, I'm embarrassed to admit that I thought a fly-in was like an Oshkosh thing where you like all literally flew in. But the term comes from a group of people going to Washington and advocating in an organized way. So it's an advocacy day. It's basically a field trip where stakeholders from the same industry travel to Washington, D.C. at the same time to swarm the Capitol. While not in a January 6th fashion, that's not what it means. It means in a professional, educational way. And while these events traditionally take place in person, fly-ins and advocacy days can also be conducted virtually on Zoom. So that's very common, especially now. Okay, Mike, got it. Thanks for the note. So here's how it works. Instead of just one person, which I've been guilty of this, there's nothing wrong with this. You're just not going to be very effective. But instead of one person sending an email to, say, Ted Cruz's office, which I've done a couple of times with other people in Texas, instead of me doing that, 50 to 100 of us, or even 30, are going to, like CEOs, engineers, researchers, we mobilize as a group and move from office to office, could be virtual office to office, and we meet face to face with staffers to explain why hydrogen aviation is vital to the member's district or state. We'll talk more about how you know why it's important or how to know if it's important, okay, later. But the takeaway for this is in this cohort, we are going to develop our messaging. We're going to identify our members of Congress that we should approach, that we should meet with, and we are going to come up with messaging. It doesn't matter if they're on the left or the right or independent. It doesn't matter because we showed earlier that there are three sort of pathways that we could take to find a way to engage with them. Okay. And so as I said earlier, you'll do this usually during February through April. It's fine if we do it after, especially since we're all kind of learning here. But ideally, it would be in the April time to educate Congress phase because that's when Congress is deciding how to spend the allowance, the budget for the next year. If you don't show up then, you might miss the chance to get your initiative on Congress's radar. So that doesn't mean you'll miss it altogether. It just means it might be 2028 instead of 2027, or maybe in 2027 it isn't as much as you wanted it to be. It is not just for lobbyists. It is anybody that's an American with a stake in the industry, from aircraft developers to hydrogen production to educators to anybody that wants to see more stuff happen in this area. They should participate. Members, and when I say members, I'm talking about members of Congress. Members prioritize hearing from constituents who provide local jobs and economic value. So that would be any entrepreneur. That would be anybody working on innovative technology that could reshape an industry. So the point of a fly-in is a massive "don't forget about us" message. So you give them like a one-page cheat sheet, a leave behind with your top reasons for wanting funding so they go to vote later. And your ideas ideally are at the top of the pile. And so the way that we do that effectively, just to go back, and I'm going to repeat this a lot, and then we're actually going to do it, and we're going to come back to this as a guide, but we will, that's not the slide I want. I want this one. So we will send our letters to the agencies, right? And at the same time, we're going to be identifying our members and we're going to send an email or call them, but probably an email, and request a Zoom call. If you're in Washington, of course, you can go meet with them in person, but you can certainly request that virtually. And you have the right to do this. It is not illegal. It is your First Amendment right. And you might not get the governor, but you'll get a staff. You'll get a staffer and you'll still get your message to them. Okay, so let's talk about our talking points. And by the way, this is going to be a homework assignment for later. So don't worry about digesting all of this right now. But when we're reaching out to our representatives or our members, we will probably have to explain what hydrogen aviation is in a very non-technical way because they may likely do not have a technical background. Most policymakers are unfamiliar with hydrogen-powered flight. So begin by briefly explaining what hydrogen aviation is and why it matters. And so this is just sort of like a generic template. Like I've made it generic for nation, state, community, works to maintain aerospace dominance. And we might want to change the wording depending on who we're talking to, right? And strengthen energy independence. As important focus must be advancing hydrogen aviation, aircraft powered by hydrogen fuel, either through fuel cells or hydrogen combustion. Notice that I did not mention energy density or get into any of the nitty gritty of that. If they ask, we certainly could tell them, but keeping it extremely high level. Number 2, focus on solutions and opportunities. Explain what policymakers can do to support the development of hydrogen aviation. So, federal research and demonstration programs can help accelerate the development of hydrogen powered aircraft and the infrastructure needed to support them. Number 3, connect the issue to local impact. Show how hydrogen aviation affects the policymakers' district or community. I think we probably, I don't know if we'll go down to like a local, but I think state and district or county for sure I could see coming into play into these. So it might look like, companies. Now I'm keeping it very generic, but we would want to be specific when reaching out to our members. Companies, universities, and research institutions in, X state are already working on hydrogen aviation technologies that could create new jobs and strengthen the local aerospace economy. That's a really powerful statement. And if you can put actual technology with that, Philip, your technology comes to mind. And I don't know if you've participated in anything like this in the past. I could see, remind me, Philip, where you're based out of?
That Danielle, I
No
am
worries.
good at multitasking.
Okay, I'm curious,
So,
have you participated in anything like this with an organized group, even a group like this one?
not in a formal setting. Certainly done a couple of accelerators and gotten close to the need and worked with some policymakers and lobbyists, light on the lobbyist side in the past. So this is kind of that deep dive towards that.
Yeah.
Certainly engage with program managers in DC and have met people across the board, but not really approach our, industry objectives and goals from this side.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's perfect because, being that I'm in Texas, so and like I said, we're going to go through this entire workbook and we're going to actually reach out to our members. But the idea is I'm in Texas. David, I believe you're in Colorado, if my memory serves me correctly.
Pennsylvania.
Bianca, Pennsylvania. Why did I think you were used to be in Colorado, huh?
No, always been
You
Penn.
never weren't.
I
Maybe it's because
probably worked
XTI.
with XTI that was out of Colorado.
Okay, that's where I'm getting that from. My bad. And I think you have mountains on your background sometimes, so maybe that's where I'm getting it. I don't know. But still, Pennsylvania. Bianca's in California. I'll have to look. But I'm guessing Georgia's in a different state altogether. Even, let's just say we have 6 different states, okay? By the end of this cohort, we have hit 6 states. I mean, hit in the most kind manner, right? That's probably not a good word to use in this day and age. We've targeted 6 states because that's where we are a constituent of the members that we're reaching out to. And so why this is so much more effective, and I would bet, Philip, that all of us have probably engaged with our local and state probably at some point in our career. I've never engaged with federal anything on policy level. I've certainly met with my share of like economic development folks and city councils, and I've done a lot of advocacy on that level. Some of it has been effective, but it always would sort of hit this point where it's like, okay, we have to see what, the state thinks, and then the state wants to see what federal thinks. And that was very frustrating to me. And I didn't realize that I could get involved on a higher level. And so what we would be doing is essentially sprinkling this advocacy messaging throughout 6 different states. And by the way, we do have more people in this cohort that had scheduling issues that will be joining us more when we get actually the hands-on part. So there will be more states. We'll be hitting, it might end up being 10 to 15 states. That's very different than one company going to, one state or, a couple of different counties in their state or even one member of Congress. And so when we go to, say, 10 states, okay, at the end of this, that means we've already educated the agencies and now we're taking this knowledge to 10 different members. So that are representing 10 different states on any side of the aisle, Congress, then we're really going to get to see 10 different states with this on their mind. We're going to have 10 to 20 states. Well, but the big takeaway is, guys and girls, is that everybody in this cohort will be connecting with their member in their state, and that state, that member is a part of Congress. And so the more people we reach, even if it's 10 offices, that's a whole lot more than zero. And with the massive lack of education or misinformation or lack of organization around this, I would bet the competition is quite small. Mike shared at the beginning when he started his advocacy for VLR Co., he was the only one. And then he brought on John Piasecki, and who else did he mention? There was one more person. I forgot who it was. But there were essentially 3 of them, and now it's one of the largest programs defended by DoD. And we're going to engage with DoD as well in this cohort. So the key takeaway is it's not that any of us have been doing it wrong. It's that we haven't had organization around contacting them at the same time and having our messaging aligned. They're, whatever side of the aisle they fall upon. Okay, so now let's see. So this will be let's move on to this one. So how to write your legislator. So identify yourself as a constituent, and you would start by, and again, this is going to be part of the capstone project in this cohort, but this is just a high level of what we're going to do. So you'll start by stating who you are, where you live or work, and offices give the most attention to messages from their constituents. We'll use email. Okay, earlier I said phone or email, but yeah, due to security, we'll use email. We'll use proper titles. Obviously, that's kind of obvious. We'll keep it brief. We'll state our position. We'll personalize the message, and then we'll proofread, and then we'll send the message at the right time. And so later in this course, we have actual lobbyists that are going to grade our pitches. So we will identify who the member or members are that we want to reach out to, and we'll draft the message together, and then we'll be graded on that. So let's talk a little bit about the congressional schedule. So understanding the schedule is pretty important. Understanding the congressional schedule requires tracking in-session weeks, lawmakers in D.C. versus state district work periods. So the House usually operates on a Tuesday to Thursday schedule, while the Senate is more flexible. Major activity, including committee hearings and votes, occurs when they're in session. And then in session versus recess, Congress is typically in session about 35 weeks of the year, with long breaks in August and around Christmas. There's a weekly rhythm. Monday through Friday are usually travel days. The House rarely votes before 6:30 p.m. Tuesday. And then here's another one, state schedule. So that's a good tool to have as well. So we covered fly-ins. We covered talking points. Okay, now let's talk about our leave behind. And these are, by the way, these have not been reviewed by the lobbyists. And so again, Mike was sharing at the beginning, he was the original advocate for the VLR code, the Vertical Lift Research Center of Excellence programs. There are currently 3. And he was the original advocate for that. He later brought on a couple of more people, and those were funded by the Department of Defense. He hired a lobbying firm called ACG. And that is important because they are going to be grading this, including my work, by the way. I just want to show you who they are. So their team. So Michael Barbera and Jamie will be the 2 that are going to be grading. And gosh, I had too many tabs. And so they have not seen these yet. But as I mentioned, we want to leave behind like sort of a cheat sheet that they can share with people if they decide to support it. Mike and Michael Barbera, might say that this is too technical, or maybe it needs to be, easier. But I did my best to come up with 10 reasons why I think hydrogen aviation matters for members of Congress. So with Europe outspending the U.S. 3-1 in hydrogen R&D, immediate federal funding is required to prevent American aerospace from losing its 50-year dominant export status. Number 2, drone dominance, which is very big in the federal government right now. Hydrogen enables drones to fly for days rather than hours. And that's a bit lofty, but it could if you were in like a glider, providing the persistent endurance required for high altitude monitoring and border security. Energy and supply chain sovereignty. Hydrogen eliminates reliance on foreign battery minerals, currently 80% controlled by China, and it reduces dependence on volatile global oil markets for traditional fuels. Number 4, energy dominance. I don't know if we're allowed to say that anymore, but this could be tweaked a bit. Hydrogen propulsion utilizes abundant American natural gas and nuclear power, and during the U.S. remains the world's leading energy producer. Notice I didn't say anything about renewable green hydrogen here. I believe I do later, but that doesn't mean it couldn't be, just being kind of careful of what to say when. Let's see. Number 5, tactical cell. Hydrogen fuel cells operate with near silence and low thermal signatures, giving the U.S. military a critical edge in stealth, logistics, and reconnaissance. Number 6, contested logistics. And let me just explain what that means to the non-defense people. I'm not defense either. I just learned this from being around defense people. But, imagine you're in the middle of nowhere and you're deployed, okay? Like you're in the army and you've got a headset, a walkie-talkie, and a bunch of other equipment that maybe is powered by batteries. And maybe you've got a, four-wheeler that needs to be refueled, but you're taking your vehicle to get refueled at a known location. Well, the enemy's going to know that location, so it becomes a target very quickly. We're seeing that kind of thing happen right now. And your boots on the ground are using battery-powered equipment, and they do have some rechargeable batteries, but often they're not very reliable. So they just end up opening a new battery and throwing their batteries out. And that ends up leaving like a trail of batteries, like a trail of breadcrumbs for the enemy to find. And they also become a target. So ideally, you would be able to produce that fuel on site and you wouldn't have to leave things behind. So that's what we're saying right here. And the Army's very interested in that. In fact, there's a grant open right now for this specific thing. And if you're interested in participating in that, connect with me because we are putting together a proposal for that. Anyway, the number 7, American job growth. So hydrogen technology sustains the 2 million jobs in the U.S. aerospace and defense sector by ensuring we leave the next generation of aircraft development. Maybe there should be probably a could sustain. I mean, that's a kind of a bold statement there, but just, kind of throwing out some ideas of what might be important to members. Superior performance. Hydrogen's energy density enables longer flight times for eVTOLs and regional aircraft that batteries cannot simply achieve. Now, this one would be obviously meant for a member that is involved in eVTOLs. If they're not involved in an eVTOL related committee or anything, this would mean nothing to them. Number 9, grid and base resilience. So hydrogen acts as a long duration energy storage, providing critical backup power for airports and military installations during grid instability. Number 10, global standard setting. As the FAA develops its safety and certification roadmap, the U.S. leadership enables American technical protocols become the global regulatory standard. So those are just 10 different things that I'm not saying to leave this entire cheat sheet behind, but you could choose a couple and you could tweak a couple of these. But the idea is that let's say 10 of us end up reaching out to 10 different members from 10 different states, right? The idea is that whichever one of these we use, and it would depend on what committees they're on and what they're interested in overall with what we're doing in this cohort. So you wouldn't go in and say hydrogen aviation. You need to care about hydrogen aviation because I'm trying to think of a really ridiculous example, because you can fill up balloons with it at birthday parties. Maybe you would want to do this, but you could replace helium in birthday balloons. An extreme example that I thought of at the top of my head, but that wouldn't be aligned, okay? And, if I didn't cover something that's important to you or your company, we can certainly tweak these. But by the end of this cohort, we want this to be very structured, and maybe we pick 2 or 3 that really shine through, but they're aligned. And High Sky, by the way, should be aligned to support industry, not the other way around. High Sky is the reason we are tax exempt and we're a 501c3 is because we support you. So it should not be the other way around. We want to put these things on and organize them so that we can help you be effective. So that really covers most of what I wanted to discuss today. Some of you got here a little bit late. We had a really important announcement at the beginning. Let me just share what I said because I did actually type it out. So the most important thing is this right here. So please give that a read. And let's just take I don't know, a 5-minute break. And then we'll cover discussions and the new schedule, which we'll be meeting on Tuesdays only now. So let's take 5 minutes and I'll be right back. Okay, welcome back. So I want to open it up now. If anybody has any questions or wants to share anything, or Todd, I would love you to chime in if there was anything that I didn't cover that maybe I should have, and
Sure.
also make sure everybody has that PDF. Sorry, who was saying that? I heard
Go
two
ahead, Todd, if
voices.
you want.
I was just gonna say, Danielle, that in addition to appropriations, there are other bills that Congress works on where hydrogen aviation and hydrogen aviation elements could be included. So any one of those is an opportunity. For example, we saw the NASA reauth early this year. Congress is working on a surface transportation reauthorization, rail, but there's also some maritime stuff.
Audio.
But there are going to be some airport elements in the current surface transportation reauthorization. So if you're interested in establishing hydrogen infrastructure at an airport or a pilot program to do something like that, the surface transportation reauthorization is a good opportunity outside of the sort of normal budget process.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And Todd's one of our lectures too. You'll be able to hear a much more in-depth lecture. Maybe briefly, Todd, do you just want to share what I could share? I would say Todd is responsible. I don't know about solely responsible, but partially responsible for sure, and maybe solely for getting hydrogen into the FAA Reauthorization Act. I think 46 or 49 times, 40 something times. It's so kind of that slide that I was showing earlier about like where we are now, FAA Reauthorization Act. Todd worked on that in depth, and he's going to tell us about that work that he did with Zero Avia later in the cohort. Good to see you, by the way. It's been way too long. Heard you the other day, but I haven't seen you in forever.
Yeah, it's been a while. I was just going to ask kind of what the group goal was by the end of the month with all of this, and I don't think I fully got the
Okay,
depth of the
great
changes you
question.
made to the style and outcome of this.
So yeah, the outcome was we just decided this morning. So let me just show you the original schedule and then um, how it will change. Okay, so we just did this. We haven't done civil path and defense path. So that's what we're going to do at a later lecture. We wanted to spend more time on just kind of going high level over what we're allowed to do as a nonprofit, because it seems a lot of people still are and don't really think that they can do much. So they can. So step one was just how policy actually happens and where you fit in. And then I'll just go over the old schedule first. And so then it was going to be the FAA case study from Todd, and then a VFS case study from Mike, which he talked a little bit about this morning. And then I was going to introduce the capstone. Let me show you the capstone. That will
Yeah.
help.
My other
'Cause
kind of thought on this too was that there was going to be like a day on the hill.
Yeah, there is. So it's just virtual though. So
Okay.
so we are. So that's what the capstone. So if you read the guidebook, and maybe I need to send you the syllabus, but the outcome is we are going to Congress. We're going to our members during this cohort. So we're gonna assign homework one, and you could get started on this as well. You don't have to wait for us to assign it, but you're gonna identify who represents you. So who your house, and I'll share all of this as well. And a lot of it should be in the course materials. Maybe it isn't yet. But who represents you, your House member, and your senators? What relevant committees are they on, like transportation, aviation, energy, science, armed services, appropriations, etc.? And then what might they care about with respect to hydrogen, aviation, or fuel cells, or whatever? So aerospace jobs, hydrogen projects, airports, military bases in their district. So that's step one. So then we'll draft our outreach based on the guidelines provided in this. So I give high level, I did this at the beginning, it's recorded, but like 3 reasons why hydrogen aviation matters. And these 3 reasons were just like a high level. Like if you're talking to like maybe an aerospace person, they might care about reason 1. If you're talking to a defense person, they might care about, so I still mean a member, but they might have a defense background. Then they may care more about contested logistics. So especially, if you're trying to get into tap into some DoD funding, then this could be one that you're using, but it really needs to go off of your member. And then maybe your member cares, maybe is more on the left and cares more about zero emissions. So I tried to think of like 3 reasons that would sort of cover the spectrum of which side of the aisle somebody might fall on. And then it goes into more detail. It goes to more detail down here. Where is that leave behind cheat sheet thing? So then here are a bunch of different things that you could, and then there's even like an email draft. So we're going to go over this in more detail, but I got to go back to my picture. So the capstone project will be introduced officially on Monday. On Tuesday. And so we would start the capstone project. So we would identify our member and see what committees they're on and what is of interest to them and draft an email to them, not send it. And then we'll have another lecture on understanding the policy gaps in hydrogen aviation and what to do about them. That's on Tuesday, a week from today. That's going to be a phenomenal lecture that will get really deep. They just published a paper on the United States hydrogen aviation readiness in the United States from a policy lens. A lot of you probably recognize these names. There's some top folks in this space. And then we'll have a prepare for success. We're talking about like some of the challenges with lobbying or advocating for hydrogen in general. And then we will go over those email drafts that we wrote to our members. We will read them off to they're basically be our coaches. So these are the actual lobbyists that Mike worked with that he talked about in the beginning. So that was from ACG Group. I have that tab. There it is. So with Michael Barbera and Jamie. So they'll sort of critique us on, that's what I mean by our pitch Q&A. So that would be our email. And then finally, we will do our virtual fly-in. And let me also open this. Maybe you haven't seen this syllabus as well, Philip. Maybe it goes into it a little bit better.
Oh, I'm just excited to engage.
Well, me too. I'm so excited. And so the only thing that will change is we're just going to stretch it out over 6 weeks instead of 3. Tuesday will stay the same. This Tuesday, April 21st, will turn into lecture 2. And I think we'll put the case studies to this next Tuesday and then scoot these out. So I'll have to do a little bit of tweaking, but everything stays the same. The outcome is still the same because we're doing a virtual fly-in. We're calling it an industry field trip day, but if I show you this capstone, I don't think I have it in here. Yeah, I don't have it in this one. Sorry. Not everybody's going to get a meeting scheduled on the day that, ideally we would all have if we were going to DC, then we would all be doing it physically the same day. But since it's virtually, I might get a Wednesday and you might get a Tuesday or whatever, but we'll still keep the cohort going and share the feedback even after the cohort. So the alignment is still there, even if it doesn't actually happen on the same day, though we'll try to get them as close in there as we can. Did I answer your question?
Yeah,
Awesome.
absolutely.
Danielle, hey, while we're looking ahead and thinking about capstone,
Mm-hmm.
I just want to put in people's heads, it'd be super useful. A lot of the stuff that we're looking for from Congress is funding. Most of that funding is probably going to be in the form of R&D, NASA, DOE, FAA. It would be super useful if you could think about your own entity, company, organization, and what your specific, like if a congressperson was going to write a blank check for a program, what is it that you want? And if you don't have anything specific, which is fine, the current proposed budget slashes NASA, the Aeronautics Research Mission Directorate, ARMD, from 900 and something million down to 600 and something million. And that's really where all the non-space hydrogen aviation science seems to be happening. So that would be, something to keep in mind, just a general pitch to Congress to preserve the ARMD budget as they're going through their probes.
Yeah, that's really good feedback. Approps. That's a new one. I'm going to adopt that. It'll sound smarter.
And then,
And,
I'm sorry,
also,
one more thing.
go ahead.
One more thing
Yeah,
was
no.
that in the NASA reauthorization of 2026 earlier this year, Congress specified that they want them doing hydrogen work in ARMD. And so that doesn't necessarily translate to NASA actually doing that work or investing in that R&D. And so another element is to say, hey, to your congressperson, you guys said NASA do X, Y, and Z. NASA's not doing it, right? Like, so let's make sure in the appropriations report language, which is sort of separate from the funding part, you remind them that they are expected to deliver on these items.
Yeah,
I
that's
guess
really good.
hey, it's Mike Hirschberg. I'm back again. I just drove into DC and I had terrible reception, but hopefully you can hear me. I'm actually driving kind of close to Capitol Hill, as it turns out. But
In
I'm
there, and
actually
we'll
going to
all just do it right now.
I'm driving over to University of Maryland. Professor Dada is the chair of our local, or sorry, he's the professor, University of Maryland, for the Vertical Flight Society student chapter. And just an example, he's got a hydrogen lab and has tried to, find funding and things like that. And there hasn't been any, yet. But that's something, like that the Maryland congressional delegation should be and could be interested in. So a lot of it is like trying to anchor something. All politics is local, so try to find something that is appealing or germane to the member of Congress that you're talking to. But I did want to just mention, just to color a little bit of what Todd just said about, NASA hasn't done anything with hydrogen yet. Well, I haven't actually asked them. I need to follow up again on that. So I'll find out before we tell Congress that NASA's not doing anything, not spending that money. I need to do some more digging to see if that's correct or not.
Hmm. To be fair, I think he said if NASA isn't, but it
Gotcha.
insinuated maybe.
No, I didn't. He's right. He's right. I
Oh,
didn't.
okay.
And it's a good idea to be fair about it.
Hmm. One
But I
thing.
would just say, this to me, my participation in this course isn't successful unless, I can sit in on a call with you on a Zoom call with with congressional staff, or just make sure that you get that session that you're looking for, and you get a half hour of somebody's time to hear your concerns.
That's huge,
Excellent.
guys. That's
That's awesome.
huge. Yeah.
And I do want to mention also that even if Congress just asks, like if you said, hey, find out the committee of who asked that, or the Congress, the office that asked, and you just ask, hey, you guys told Congress to do this, what have they done? You should, maybe if you ask them, like if the NASA administrator says, hey, Congress is asking me about, that's a key success. If you can just get, just asking questions, if you can get Congress to just ask questions of the FAA and NASA and stuff like that, that's great.
I That's great. Thanks for sharing that, Mike. It's I think it's an intimidating, just from the feedback I've been getting on the course, it's sort of an intimidating, I mean, if I'm being quite honest, this is a bit daunting to me. But I think we're going to see a lot of learn as we go. For me, especially, I've never done this. I'll be honest, I was very nervous about this lecture this morning because this is a new space for us. So, but we're gonna learn it together. We're gonna tackle it. And huge thanks to Mike and Todd for volunteering your time. They are volunteering their time. They've both been very effective in aviation advocacy and getting funding and getting things moving into certain areas. So that's huge that Todd's gonna make sure you have success when you have your meeting. I mean, you also have time to practice. So I just love that. I'd love to be a fly on the wall just to learn, but you can always update me as well. One thing that I forgot to do at the beginning is to make sure you all know how to navigate in here. So I usually start every course with this, and I didn't because I recognized a lot of names, but now I'm remembering. Philip, I think you are new to High Sky Connect fairly. So you all found you found the Zoom. Hopefully, Phil, you weren't tardy because you couldn't find it. If you were, let me know so that doesn't happen again. I'm going to assume you were busy unless you tell me otherwise. So right now we have this obviously join live, but once the cohort is done, this will disappear. I mean, at the very, very end, which I need to update the schedule. But once we're done with the live lectures, this tab will be gone. These tabs will stay here forever. So here you can just post anything. It's like just like Facebook, right? But only the people in this course can see it. Course materials will be in here right now. There aren't that many because it was just my lecture, but we'll be adding a lot more. And there's sorry, that wasn't accurate. This will be updated. And then you can talk to each other in here. So in this discussion, I believe anybody can post. So if you want to ask, let me just stick a link to it and let's just say, go ahead and go in here and say hi. And the reason I want to stress this is because, Mike, don't you do it, not while you're driving, is that after the live lectures conclude, we're going to keep this going and we'll continue chatting and updating each other. And this is just a good area where we can stay informed without any noise. Just somebody go in here. I just put a link in the chat. Just try to post in the discussion section. And I just want to make sure that I've set this up accurately and that you all can find it. And the recordings are going to go in the course material. So this course material section is going to get really big. This live lectures will get small until it goes away, and then the discussion will grow as well. Okay, I just got a notification. Bianca shared a hi. Oh, Bianca, I think I might have you as an admin in here, so I don't know, but hopefully it works for everybody. But I do see it. Awesome. So that's where you'll find all of the awesome documents that I was sharing this morning. I'm going to be putting all of those into course materials. Sorry that they weren't already in there. I totally thought they were. So that's where we are. We won't meet Thursday. We will meet Tuesday, and I will shift the schedule around, but the outcome will be the same. And a very exciting lecture on Tuesday. So spread the word. By the way, Tuesday's lecture is open to everyone. It's just you can access it here, but you can also access it on a Zoom. So share it. It'll be a presentation of a great paper by Ashira, Phil, and Elias. Cool. Okay. Any last minute questions or comments?
No questions on my end. I'm excited to meet next Tuesday.
I am as well. Thanks everybody for being flexible. We're also learning as we go and shifting things around to get these awesome instructors in. But I am confident that we're going to see some fruits of our labor in here. So I'm really excited to see what we can do with a small group of people. It only takes one, right? Or two to be more powerful. So cool. That's the end of my spiel for the day. Thanks everybody for attending lecture 1, and we'll see you on Tuesday. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Stay
Thanks everyone.